It's summer. Well, it might not be summer where you are, but you may well be knitting with non-wool yarns for summer wear. I wanted to talk a little bit about the non-wool because things are a little bit different than you might expect, and if you've not worked with them before, there's some tips I want to share to help you take advantage of them. When we think about wool yarns, we tend to think about stretch, and things are very, very different in the non-wool world when it comes to stretch, so we must delve into this. Cotton is the first fiber we think about, I think, when we're talking about non-wool knitting, summer weight knitting, and for good reason. It creates a marvelous fabric that feels really good against your skin. I'm wearing a cotton shirt now and I love it. It also, great colors in cotton yarns. It can be very easy to find and it can be very affordable as well, so it's a terrific choice. Cotton does behave very differently though. Some people say that cotton has no stretch in it. That's actually not true. Cotton does have some stretch in it. You feel it. If you've knitted with something like hemp, more on which later, versus something like cotton, you'll know that cotton is actually a little bit easier and a little bit more pleasant to knit with than hemp because cotton does have some give. So when you put the needle in, again, the stitch moves a little to accommodate. Where cotton is different is that the stretch, that little bit of give, can get exhausted after a while. And think about, great example, I'm stealing from someone else, a pair of jeans. After a while, a pair of jeans, they stretch out when you wear them and they kind of lose the ability to bounce back. They sort of stay stretched out. And that's what happens with cotton yarn. So over time, with wear and with washing, it will stretch out and just kind of not return back to its original shape anymore. Now, this isn't actually a bad thing. It's all about using it in the right way. Because cotton doesn't have the grippiness, it doesn't have the scales that wool fibers does, it's not crimpy and curly, it's inclined to sort of stay pretty loose. It's pretty relaxed when you knit with it, which is lovely because your lace actually doesn't need a ton of blocking. It's a good thing. You don't need to block it, and it's also a good thing because cotton doesn't take a block. Cotton doesn't have a memory. Remember, with wool, we're used to blocking out a shawl by stretching it, pinning it, and letting it dry, and it remembers that stretch position. Cotton doesn't do that. You can certainly stretch it out when it's wet, you know what that's like, but it doesn't remember that stretched position. But that's okay, it doesn't need to, because naturally it's already pretty relaxed. And the relaxed nature of the fabric means that it's gorgeous because those yarn overs are relaxed. The fabric lies open, the stitches are nice and separate, so you get a really great lace fabric without all the fuss of all that pinning and blocking nonsense. I love it for that. Cotton's different in another way too. It's heavier. A yard of cotton actually weighs more than a yard of wool of the equivalent thickness of yarn. It weighs more, which means good for lace shawls, for example, because the weight of the lace shawl in cotton will drape beautifully. It will keep the yarn overs and the fabric open and gorgeous. For a garment, though, it can be a bit heavy, which may or may not be what you want in the summer. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Again, just know that if it's a long sleeve cotton sweater, it weighs a lot, right? If you're looking to stay cool, maybe not. And on the weight, another thing that happens with cotton is that if it gets wet, you get sprayed by a garden hose or fall in the swimming pool or maybe just more realistically get a bit sweaty, it will take on that moisture, and the moisture can take a while to evaporate. It takes a while to dry. So it may not be the most pleasant fiber, 100% pure cotton for hot weather garment, but it's amazing in blends. If you blend it with wool, for example, or a man-made fiber or another non-wool like a linen, what you get is you combine the properties. So you get the gorgeousness of the feel of the cotton fabric, but you can lighten it up a little, you can help with the breathability and the moisture of it. Also fantastic about cotton, of course, is that it's machine washable. Excellent to help it bring it back into shape when it does stretch out a little bit. That's a marvelous thing about machine washing it. It's just easy care, which we love. Very important, especially in the summer. Things are more inclined to need washing. But I would, where possible, avoid the clothes dryer. Cotton doesn't hold dye forever. Again, jeans, we know this, right? They do fade over time, and the heat of the dryer can hasten the fading. So just be careful about that, and it can pull things out of shape. Again, with a heavier garment, if it's flopping around in the dryer, you do risk pulling things out of shape. If you do want to use the dryer, lower heat, always better. And a mesh bag is fantastic for making sure something's not stretching out. I mentioned blends, and when I mentioned blends, I mentioned linen, and I adore linen. It's one of my favorite yarns, actually, one of my favorite fibers, because it has many of those wonderful properties that cotton does, not being wool, being one of them, but it solves a couple of the problems as well. Linen breathes a bit more than cotton does, and it can help the moisture evaporate a bit more. And so what it does is it allows you to kind of lighten up and create a more breathable fabric. And for better or for worse, linen has some texture to it. It's crunchier than cotton, and I really like what that does in a fabric. I've got two swatches here. I've got a cotton swatch, and I've got a linen swatch. And what we've got with the cotton, this is beautifully smooth and it feels really great against my skin. With the linen, what we've got here is there's some crunch to it. Do you see how the stitches are a little bit more open? You can see, let's see if this works. You can see the color of my t-shirt through the linen. There's more holes between the stitches, basically, because the yarn is crunchier. It's not sliding in upon itself. Now, you can take some of the crunchiness away with the clothes dryer. So like cotton with linen, what you want to do is you definitely want to put it in the machine, and you definitely want to put it in the dryer, because the dryer will take that crunch away if that's not something you're looking for. It's important to talk about the texture of cotton. I'm going to go back to cotton for a minute. The texture of the cotton yarns, now that I've got these swatches in my hand. What we have here, this is pretty common, is you've got multiple plies in the cotton. And that's a nice way of creating a fiber that's pleasant on the hands and easy to work with and doesn't feel quite so stiff, but it still gives you a really smooth fabric. And this is actually a little bit surprising. In the ball, this looks wiggly. Some cottons are deliberately spun to create a more textured fabric, and what you get there is you get those multiple plies, but some of the plies are fluffy and some of them are smooth, creates a different texture. Linen, another thing to be aware of, is even heavier though than cotton and even more inclined to stretch out. Cotton stretches a bit, linen tends to stretch a lot, and it doesn't have the bounce back. It doesn't have the ability to return to its original size that wool does. So what can happen with a linen garment, for example, is it may start as a sweater. If you're not careful, it can turn into a dress. So with a linen garment, we like to make something with seams so that it holds its shape, it holds its structure, and it doesn't stretch out quite as much, and it doesn't sag. There's a definite relationship between the properties of the yarn and the properties of the garment. And this points to an important thing about yarn substitution. You should always choose a yarn that has as similar characteristics as possible to the yarn that the designer chose. So I wouldn't want to knit a garment designed for linen with wool, and equally I wouldn't want to knit a garment designed for wool with linen. The garment really needs those properties and is designed to take advantage of the properties of the yarn. Two other non-wool fibers worth discussing. Hemp. Hemp it's like linen, but just more so. I think it's stiff like linen, crunchy like linen, heavy like linen, but even more so. It's also incredibly strong and very, very durable. So you need to think about what that's like in the knitting experience, because with all of that, you get something that feels a little stiffer and a little rougher. Hemp on its own makes fantastic market bags. If you want a garment, really the best choice there is going to be hemp blended with something else. And there's some hemp and wool yarns that are absolutely fantastic, and they will bring a bit of softness. They will reduce some of that roughness. Like linen, hemp loves to be washed and loves to be machine dried. And over time, that washing and drying, like linen, it's a combination of the time and the experience, what it goes through when it's machine washed and dried, that will really soften that up. And with linen, You want to be careful about that. You don't want to get over enthusiastic with that kind of treatment, but with hemp you need to get over enthusiastic with that kind of treatment so that it softens up and feels really good. Bamboo is another fiber that people talk about for non-wool knitting and for warm weather knitting. Bamboo is a bit challenging. It is a beautiful fabric and fiber in that it has a nice sheen to it and it's quite silky. Couple of challenges though. From a knitting and fabric perspective, it just stretches. It tends to stretch and stretch and stretch and keep stretching. So again, you're risking a dress out of something that was a crop top very quickly. The other challenge with bamboo is, although the plant itself is quickly renewing, it grows fast, there's a lot of chemicals and water required to process it into a yarn, so it's not necessarily as environmentally friendly as it might be proposed to be. Bamboo is really part of a category of fibers, viscose and rayons. These are plant-based yarns, tencel as well. They're plant source, but they're processed, heavily processed. So rayon in this category. And the rayon was developed as an artificial silk back in times when silk was not as readily available, and you have a natural source, but you have to be conscious. If you're environmentally thinking about the environmental impacts, you do have to be conscious of the processing that takes place there. And with rayon and bamboo and viscose and all of these, they're a little bit fragile too when they're wet, which is why rayon in particular is one of the few fibers, rayon and viscose, where you really do have to think about dry cleaning. Normally I would say hand wash everything, but these are the fabrics where dry cleaning may actually be the right answer.